All right, you beautiful humans. Hey, if you are new here, I do not typically do these recap events necessarily and kind of talk about this. I do a lot of testing and putting the technology through its paces. But on this one, I'm really excited because reeling off of the stream this morning with Alex and Patrick, I can certainly link that up. I think Alex will keep that up for the next couple of days on his channel, but also Apple Unleashed. And of course, the MacBook Pros that were announced. Really what I'm inviting you to do is, I know that this is not a live stream, but I'm inviting you to hit me up in the comment section below. What did you think about this event? Did you order? What are you disappointed with? I answer almost everybody's comment or question. If for some reason I don't, it's probably just because it got like swallowed up in the thread or whatever, but I do try to get back to as many of you as possible, and I really would love to know. I have not had a chance to look through this, so I'm not even sure like what is going on. I did order a 14-inch MacBook Pro, so if you just wanted to know that, and then maybe you'll step back over to the channel when I start reviewing it, and then you'll know, and I'll walk you through like what I got. But walking through the event, I'm like out of breath because I had to like move everything around, and it's been quite a morning. So the MacBook Pro, I haven't seen this yet, supercharged for the pros. And so here's the thing. I think people kind of get caught up in the psychology of the whole pro thing. Do you have to be a pro for this? It should just be like, get rid of the pro moniker, that whole label. And I think what we'll talk about mostly is just sort of the differentiating factor when it comes to price and performance. But no, you don't have to be a pro to want this device. I'm not going to tell you that just because this is probably more than what you will do with it, that you probably don't need it. I'm not going to say that. It's your money. It's your buying decision. I do a lot of that on the channel, trying to help you make that buying decision. And for someone like myself, this is my job. So that's why I'm investing in this tech. And I also will likely have some new cameras and equipment coming into the studio. So I might need a little bit more, ability to do some heavy lifting. Now, AirPods, great. I may purchase them. I don't know if I'm going to review them. We'll see. But I really just kind of want this to be sort of focused on the MacBook Pro and, of course, the HomePod Mini. We have one, and those are fantastic as well. But learning more about the 14-inch and 16-inch models here. And, wow. All right. So supercharged for pros, again, don't let that sort of psychology get you. I think it just kind of comes down to, there are pros that need these devices for the work that they do, that they get paid to do, or that they work with clients or on things that require a certain level, like they have a threshold, and like when you're not able to have more RAM or more CPU or even a dedicated GPU. And so I understand that many people might say like, well, you customize a PC or you get a Mac Pro and you upgrade that. But this is where we are. Like I've talked about these as disposable devices, and this is where we are. So the M1 Pro and M1 Max. So it's going to be hard for me to get rid of the M1X like title that we've been giving these for months or like the last year. So that'll be interesting. Now moving in, let's just kind of go through this. Wow. We'll talk about the notch. I, of course, will correct something that I thought was going to happen. Now, here's the thing, the X's. I said this on Twitter. How many X's are we going to see on Twitter? And I don't mean in your relationships. I mean 13X graphics, the faster graphics performance, or 3.7X, a faster CPU. It's all about those like graphs and, 10 times this or whatever times that. We'll talk about a little bit of the I/O. Excited by the I/O to see that again. And I guess we just keep scrolling here. Okay, so the M1 Pro, 10-core CPU, and the M1 Max, the 10-core CPU as well. And I believe these are 8 power and 2 efficiency, if I'm not correct, or if I am correct. Up to 16-core GPU is the differentiator here, because on the M1 Max, it is 32-core GPU, but also to the fact that you can bump that up to 64 gigs of RAM. I did not get 64, but we will talk about that. And of course, 32 gigs coming in for the M1 Pro. Now, we have been testing this SoC architecture for a while. This is not new technology. For those of you that I think that I'm trying to apologize for Apple or to say that Apple is innovating, listen, Apple is building software on their hardware. So this is where I want more competition. I want Intel to come out. I want Qualcomm to come out. I want their SoCs to come out to the consumers because I want to push this all for the benefit of the consumer. Now, of course, going inside the M1 Pro and M1 Max, so power structure here, same again, SoC. Other Pro systems use power-hungry CPUs. Again, that's going to be the marketing here. And of course, really in the workflow is the power per watt. And that is really what we're kind of focused on. So M1 Pro, up to 32 gigs of unified RAM, 200 gigs on that memory bandwidth, and then of course, doubling that on the M1 Max. And I think they kind of just had to do this just from the sense of, it's doubled, keeping it simple, especially with the logistics and manufacturing that had to occur. We get a little bit here as far as M1 Pro, M1 Max CPUs. And I think this is where, so leverage up to 8 high performance cores and 2 high efficiency cores for that processing at 10th of the power. GPUs have access to lower latency data with vastly improved power efficiency. Again, really going to be pretty awesome to see that. We're going to dive more into this as we do. Oh, there's the graph. There it is. Leave it to Apple with these graphs. So CPU performance versus power. And of course, at their peak, they give us an 8-core PC laptop chip. So 1.7 times the performance and 70% less power on this. Well, we've got some numbers here on the graph. Don't know what they actually compared it to. I'll have to look in the footnotes. But the GPU performance versus power, consuming 70% less power at its peak than a PC laptop with a discrete GPU. 70% less power. I think that will be interesting to see because we're going to start seeing tests of discrete PC GPUs. I'm sure we're going to see the desktops. We're going to see laptop comparisons. One thing that I will remind everyone here, though, is that linear comparisons, those are very difficult if you're looking at software that is not either optimized for the x86 architecture and those GPUs, and the fact that, M1 with the SoC, also the GPU on metal. So again, we have to kind of consider the workflow when these comparisons come out. Oh, and of course, the M1 Max GPU performance, 100 watts less power when it comes to, delivers more performance and consumes 40% less power than a compact Pro laptop with high-performing discrete GPU compared with a high-end laptop with discrete graphics. Okay, I mean, you can read all of this, but this is going to be interesting. And like I said, the comparisons will come out. I do have an AMD Ryzen with a Vega 64 GPU in it. We can certainly run some tests, but again, we got to think about the operating system. We got to think about what we're testing and what we're really looking at. But the fact that you're getting that kind of efficiency, apparently it's scary fast with the M1 Pro. And just to kind of recap what we talked about here, and the M1 Max is scary fast. So I can't think of another name or label for it. So as we talked about, the 32 core GPU, and I think that's what pros will really be focused on as far as the GPU performance and what these things are going to be able to do. Interesting here. Just kind of going through again, as far as CPU performance, they're talking about Xcode, but there's Vectorworks, Affinity Photo, Logic Pro, 14-inch model, 16-inch model. We don't necessarily have to go through 3.7x, 2.1x, but we can see that they're obviously faster. Simple enough. Now, here's the thing. This is probably talking about the battery. Yeah, it is. So doing this all day, and the 14-inch model at 17 hours of video playback, 11 hours of wireless web browsing, and for 16-inch, we've got the 21 hours and 14 hours. That is pretty amazing. For those of you that have a current Intel-based MacBook Pro 16-inch, what are you getting with your battery, especially when you're using it? Now, here's the thing. This is not to say, folks, that you're going to get that level of battery life when you're doing intensive tasks. But for someone like myself who might be out in the field or traveling or doing whatever and relying on having to plug it in, not because of the performance, because that's the thing with the MacBook Pros is that you can keep these unplugged, you can keep these unplugged and still get the same performance when compared to an x86 architecture chip, Intel chip. And so like that's not the issue, but let's say that you're out in the field doing something really intensive and maybe you barely get an hour, 2 hours out of it. We will have to test it. I will have to like try to take it out, see what I can do, working and cutting some video, rendering, exporting, and seeing what that does to the battery. But the fact is that we're going to get better performance unplugged as far as a performance itself, but also longer performance unplugged. But I wouldn't take these numbers as exactly what you're going to get, especially if you're doing something pretty intense. Now, here's the cooling part. The cool part, or the cooling part. I had talked about this before as well, is like the thermal headroom. And I mentioned this even recently. I was wondering what they were going to do with the thermal headroom here in these chassis, because do they have more space now because of the SoC, condensing that down and then being able to work on that airflow? Because the M1 Mini, when I'm doing some pretty intensive tasks, I have never heard that fan. And for those of you who have the 13-inch MacBook Pro, the M1, what is it like for you? I mean, I have the MacBook Air and there's no fan. It throttles on some things that I'm doing that's really intensive, but I mean, I'm really pushing that device. Whereas here, advanced thermal systems move 50% more air. Hopefully it won't sound like a jet engine. That would be kind of nice, because for those of you who might like to live stream or do some gaming or whatever, and I mentioned gaming loosely, but if the fan is going to be a little unnerving for you, because again, that M1 Mini, I can live stream on that thing and you cannot hear it. Like anything that you hear in my studio is probably the fans from my lights or the network attached storage behind me. Now the XDR. So here's the thing. If you don't have an M1 iPad Pro or an XDR display or anything like that's a 5K Retina display or anything close to it, it's really hard to explain it. And brighter doesn't always equate to, or more colorful doesn't always equate to like color accuracy necessarily. And I mean, I'm not a colorist. I'm not a pro at like grading or anything. I'm still learning that. But to have a setup, a display that will give you better color accuracy when it comes to your photos and your videos, I'm pretty excited about that. Although again, on a 14-inch display, I would find myself on that ultra wide often, but for me to actually look at it on the 14-inch MacBook Pro on that display or over on the iPad Pro, because I can cut video in LumaFusion and do some work in Photoshop and Lightroom. However, I don't have like a full timeline in it, and I do reference it on the M1 iPad Pro. So it would be really nice to kind of just look over to the MacBook Pro and reference that color on that, because I know it's going to be better than my ultra wide. It's just I have my ultra wide dialed into how I like to color grade, or like how I like my videos to look, at least for right now. That could always change. Liquid Retina, XDR, and ProMotion. So what I was thinking was, what was going to happen with the differentiating factor with the 14-inch versus the 16-inch? Were they going to maybe leave Liquid Retina XDR off the 14? And maybe if ProMotion was a thing, I thought ProMotion was just a whisper, kind of like a big ask that they were not going to be able to deliver on. And the fact that they're doing it for both of these devices is pretty amazing. And to see if we can have some games that will take advantage of the 120 hertz on like within Mac OS. And that's another thing too, is that I know that there are displays out there that have been 120 hertz. It's the same thing with the 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max. I am someone who's used Android for many, many years. But what I will tell you is that Apple finally kind of getting the whole battery thing dialed in, that I can take the 13 Pro out. It's adaptive to what I need for 120 hertz, like when I need it or when I don't. And this is also something, as it says, video editors can also choose a fixed refresh rate. So being able to have control, giving us control over the display settings is something like a pro level, like a person who really wants to kind of tweak things with their external displays or their internal display. So it's at least a step closer in getting us more control with that display technology. And so again, not that it's innovative, but they're adding it as an iterative add, that they figured out the battery technology, they figured out how it's going to work with the SoC. And of course, again, considering the manufacturing delays, this is also something that's probably kind of been a bummer for them to bring this to scale. And of course, here we have all of this with the displays, mini LEDs, optical films and diffusers. Now, so 1,000 nits of sustained brightness, 1600 peak. Again, it's going to be pretty amazing to see this. Like I said, brighter doesn't necessarily mean, okay, color accuracy, but you would assume like on these displays, we will check it out. I will certainly reach out to colleagues of mine who are colorists to see what they think of this. But the fact that the pixels and of course the PPI are the same for both of these devices, I'm pleasantly surprised that they didn't really kind of, shortchange the 14-inch. 1080p HD, okay, the notch. The notch. All right. I had said in the live stream that I thought some of those renders or those kind of mock-ups, would the notch just exist and then the glass would just kind of cover that up? Because with camera technology, with bigger sensors, you need more space and to let more light in as well, but to also house that sensor. So for someone who probably isn't aware of some of that camera technology, they had to put it somewhere. Now, I'm not trying to apologize here. Aesthetically, I can see as someone who really loves the design of a MacBook Pro, that can kind of be off-putting. Now, some of you might say like, wow, that's just typical Apple. They wanted to brand it in a way that the notch exists and for you to not have to, be on a 720 potato versus a 1080 potato. I mean, how good these things will be, that'll be interesting, and how they even compare to the M1 MacBook Air. We will test that out, but the whole thing with 16:9 aspect ratio, will this even get in your way? Now, during the event, Apple also used dark mode and kind of hiding that notch a little bit. So were they proud of it? Was it something they just had to do from a design perspective, whether they had to put the notch in and leave it like as it looks, like as you see it? I know that they had to do it like internally to get the sensors in there and to get the tech in there. But could they have covered it up with the glass and maybe hid it in some way? I don't know, possible. We will dig into these. Now for my audio friends, for those of you out there, spatial audio, MacBook Pro speakers are fantastic, but if you're doing audio, you're probably using reference monitors or like the monitors, like over ear monitors. But to be able to hear it just sort of on the fly, to have, just kind of post that up, when you're around some friends or colleagues or whatever, and they can hear it through the MacBook Pro. I mean, that's pretty cool. But again, if you are into audio, you're probably more focused on actual monitors to review that. Now, more plugged in than ever, transfer photos and videos with SDXC card reader, connecting TVs or displays with HDMI output. So here's the thing, and did we even talk about the displays? Oh yeah, we will in here in just a second. So you got Thunderbolt 4 on the left, 2 of those. MagSafe, I mean, I miss MagSafe. So we can kind of talk about that. Headphone jack, good that that's still there. And the SD card slot, thank you. And then another Thunderbolt 4 port. We're still gonna be in the dongle life. We're still gonna have these things connected to hubs, I'm certain. But HDMI, and I don't know if it's 2.1, I don't know. We could probably pop that up on the screen if I figure that out. I can't remember if they said that in the event. Now, the beauty about it is with MagSafe, we were kind of talking about, is MagSafe going to be the only way to charge it? And no, it's not, because many of you might say like, well, that's just proprietary, Apple's way of your MagSafe charger breaks. And now the only way you can charge your Mac is with MagSafe. But no, you can plug it into the Thunderbolt 4 port. Now, here's the thing. We talked about Thunderbolt 3, USB 4, and really, was it true Thunderbolt 4 with Apple? Because there was a lot of like early on with the M1s as far as, is this true Thunderbolt 4? And of course, the lack of external display support. We'll talk about the throughput as well and the speeds, but that wasn't happening. So connect up to 3 Pro Display XDRs and a 4K TV with the M1 Max. And connect up to 2 Pro Display XDRs with the M1 Pro. So we're getting more display support there. So that's actually looking more like we're heading into that Thunderbolt 4 throughput, and it will be compliant with that. And before we get into the keyboard, but that's the thing, like with the throughput, I had talked about on the channel Thunderbolt 3 performance, and that you really, that communication protocol is not there. And they were relying on Intel's retimers to clean up and amplify that signal for the Thunderbolt connection. So is this going to be a problem? We don't know because we haven't gotten a teardown. We don't know what that's going to look like. So we don't even know if those retimers are in these devices. But if we have more power on those chips, then will we finally, when we request more throughput from the Thunderbolt ports, will we actually get it versus having to fully saturate it with like multiple SSDs or displays or what that might look like? So I'll be interested to see what that entails. And of course, the keyboard, this will be interesting. It does, like, it's pretty slick. I mean, so what is this? Full height function key rows, the touch bar. I mean, I'm sorry for those that the muscle memory was there for you, but it's not now. But I like the look of these keys, and I certainly, like, I still have the butterfly keys on my 2017 MacBook Pro. You can't even type on it because it's like I need to get it replaced. But I love the look of that. I mean, that's pretty slick. And so I can't wait to see like what that feels like as far as like to type on it. Monterey is going to be interesting. I'm really excited for a lot of you out there who will get a chance to use Monterey, who haven't done any beta testing on it. So of course we can kind of talk about the M1 Pro, M1 Max, 10,000 apps and plugins. I can definitely say that there are more apps and plugins that are getting to be optimized for Apple Silicon, because Rosetta 2 will be around, but it's going to be on the side. It's going to be on the periphery eventually. As good as it is, things just need to be more optimized for Silicon. Like, I think if you want to be in the space, and I think if you want to get the attention of people who are paying money for your products and services or depending on them for work, then definitely the optimization is going to be key. So let's go into what I think. So let's talk about ordering here. Now, here's the differentiator. 13-inch, this could be the confusing part. So 13-inch, we're starting at $12.99. And this is where some of the buying advice might come in. So 8 gigs of unified RAM and 256 gigs of storage. So let's just go in and select that. And we bump this up to 16 gigs because I think 16 gigs, it's a must. So we're going 16 gigs here. And let's say, okay, 256 gigs. I mean, we're already at $14.99. But if we wanted, because I think the 14-inch, they said it was going to start at 1 terabyte, we're at $18.99. So you've got 16 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage, $18.99. That could be a question, right? So let's go back out. So 14-inch, let's just start with the base model at $19.99. And the base M1 Pro 8-core CPU, 14-core GPU, and you are starting 16 gigs. You're starting there. Okay, so your storage isn't it starts at 512, but at $19.99. Okay, so I was thinking it started at 1 terabyte of SSD, but you're looking at a pretty equivalent kind of setup for just like $100 more, right? I mean, pretty close to it. And I think these are the things that people think about when they want to buy. And they're like, well, yeah, like that's going to be a massive leap up because how many X's is that? And look at the graphs. It's going to be more powerful. And the screen. And of course, just newer technology. So I can understand why that would be a limiting, not necessarily a limiting factor, but something that you'd be at a crossroads like, well, which one should I get? However, the issue becomes, like myself, not really like myself, but I think a lot of us, is we're like, no, we're not going to go base. If we're going to get this at the pro level, we're going to go M1 Max 10-core CPU and 32 gigs. So we're already 32 gigs of unified memory. It just defaults to that. And 1 terabyte of storage. And this is what I ended up getting. So for $32.99 US dollars, it's a lot of coin, my friends. And I didn't get it because I felt like, oh, I needed a future-proof, for a decade. Because as I've said before, these are disposable devices in my opinion. And so for many of you, you might think like, wow, if that is technically a disposable device or something that I might not be using for 5 to 10 years. And some of you might be, but just the way that these things are built, you can't really upgrade them. You may be moving on to the latest and greatest in the next few years. It is possible. So does $32.99 make sense for you? But that is what I ended up getting, and I will be testing heavily on this channel. But here's another thing. So 14-inch, 32 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage, $32.99. I think this might work out. Let me see. 16-inch, because here's another question. Let's go just, should we go base model or no? So we'll go, all right, we'll go $34.99 here, because what that actually gets you is 32 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. And so for another $200, I think that's actually the same. Hold on, let me just double check that. Yeah, so the same, so it looks like the same CPU, GPU. So yeah, for like $200 more. Oh, those are shipping in November. Then you're thinking like, yeah, so for another $200 more, why wouldn't I get the 16? Like, why wouldn't I just go ahead and get the 16? The bigger, the better, the faster. But again, when we talk about speed, if there's an issue with the thermal headroom in the 14-inch, which I'm hoping that that's not going to be the case, these can be equivalent as far as their performance. So I didn't pick up a 16-inch because for me, I don't like to just buy it just to buy it. Like I want to buy it and use it and test it. And so I know that there'll be plenty of comparisons out there. So definitely stay tuned for those from other channels. But yeah, so that might be something to consider as well. Like for those of you who are like, well, I just kind of maxed out my 14-inch, but for another $200, why don't I just get the 16? I don't want the 16-inch footprint. I just didn't want that massive screen. I think it's probably going to be beautiful to look at, but for portability and moving that thing around, I mean, an extra pound, I mean, I don't know like what the difference will be. Like we'll have to actually look at that, but that extra pound or maybe even a little bit more can be a deciding factor for some of you who just need a smaller footprint. So just thinking about that. All right, so I felt like I've really kind of just rambled on this whole thing because I don't, like I said, I don't normally do these recaps, but I would really love to know from the community because again, I try to respond to all of you. What did you end up getting? What are you thinking? Are you disappointed that we didn't get a baby Mac Pro or i.e. the Mac Mini update? I'm bummed about it because I really like the M1 Mac Mini, but I'll probably end up using that as a streaming device, but I will be doing some comparisons. So I really do want you to just hit me up in the comment section below. I will try to get to as many of you as I possibly can. I want to know what you thought of the event, what you're thinking, or are you going to wait just until the tests come out? Although we're already seeing the shipping starting to slip. So I'm ordered. I should get it by next week. I hope to just get this thing rolling in the test. I'm planning on probably not sleeping very much. Hit me up over there on Twitter. I'm very active over there. Comment section below. You go out there and do those things that matter. You rock those beautiful faces, and I'll catch you right back here on the next one.